They buried her baby in the dirt beside the trail. No marker, no ceremony, just a shallow grave and the howling wind. Elizabeth Dixon Smith didn't cry. There was no time for crying. The oxen needed water. The wagon axle was splitting. And the trail, always the trail, stretched on for 1,000 more unforgiving miles. In 1847, the promise of Oregon came with a cost most couldn't imagine. For Elizabeth, it meant carrying her children across a continent while watching them starve, watching them die, and still pressing forward. Because there was no going back. Not for a woman like her. Elizabeth was 26 years old when she and her husband decided to leave Iowa and join the thousands of pioneers headed west. They packed what little they had, clothing, tools, a few books, and loaded their wagon alongside 5 children. The journey was supposed to take 5 months. It would take nearly a year. Her journal, scrawled in brief, often fractured entries, gives us a rare glimpse into the mind of a woman trying to survive one of the harshest migrations in American history, not as a settler, but as a mother. In one entry, Elizabeth wrote, "I have not changed my clothes in 15 days. I am barefoot. I pulled the wagon myself for 4 miles today." She wasn't writing for sympathy. There was no one to hear her. She was documenting the unrelenting truth. When the oxen collapsed, when her husband's leg became infected, she pulled the wagon herself. She carried her children, literally, across the desert, over the mountains, through rivers so deep they nearly drowned. No cavalry, no safety, just will. The Oregon Trail was a graveyard. At its peak, 1 in 10 who set out would die along the way, from cholera, exposure, starvation, accidents. For Elizabeth, the reality hit quickly. Within the first months, they lost their youngest child, too weak to survive the fever that swept through the camp. She didn't have time to grieve. With food supplies low and water scarcer by the day, she had to ration every scrap. She describes cooking spoiled meat, boiling leather, feeding her children meals of flour and river water. One night, lightning struck near their wagon. It caught fire, and they lost half their possessions. The next day, they walked barefoot through ash and mud, wrapped in smoke and silence. By the time they reached the Blue Mountains, Elizabeth was limping. Her feet were swollen, cracked, and bloodied from weeks without shoes. They had no soap, no clean water. Her children were coughing blood. She wrote, "My husband can walk no more. I fear I am next." But she didn't stop. They crossed the mountains in silence, dragging, climbing, crawling. When they reached the Columbia River, Elizabeth built a raft from fallen logs and ferry scraps. She steered her surviving children through the current, without help, without maps, just sheer memory and desperation. When they finally arrived in the Willamette Valley, it wasn't paradise. It was wilderness, mud, trees, rain. But Elizabeth didn't stop. She helped build a cabin with her own hands, raised a garden from scorched earth, bore another child. She never recovered from the trail, not truly, but she lived. And in time, so did her legacy. The cabin she helped raise would become part of Oregon's pioneer backbone. Her descendants would thrive where she once starved. Elizabeth Dixon Smith never became famous. There are no monuments in her name, but her words survived. "The journey has been long," she wrote in her final entry. "I have lost much, but I have arrived." It wasn't heroism that carried her west. It was resolve, the same kind that carried thousands of nameless women down the long, deserted trails of history. But hers was not deserted, not truly. Because we remember. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.